Coming up, how even the best laid plans can have unintended and murderous consequences.
We've got no drugs and one dead body.
It was supposed to be a simple arrest on a Caribbean beach.
The next thing I hear is the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire.
And if you have to fire your gun, fire first.
In self-defence, the policeman pulled his gun out and shot him.
Welcome to the Narco Warriors. Hello and welcome to another episode of Narco Warriors. Today Graham's going to talk to us about his postings in both Miami and Barbados. Graham, can you tell me first about your second day in Barbados where you're involved in a gunfight?
We'd picked up some intelligence that there was going to be a landing of drugs on Miami Beach in Barbados. Miami Beach is also known as Endeavour Beach. It's a typical touristy beach, sandy beach, on the south coast of Miami. And there was going to be a drug landing there late at night, early hours of the morning. How the drugs were going to be brought up was going to be by pirogue. Now, a pirogue is a colloquial expression down in Venezuela and other parts of the region for a fishing boat, maybe about 40, 50 feet long. And these boats would have 4 to 6, sometimes even more, outboard motors on the back, so they could do about 40, 50 knots. And we knew that this was going to be departing the north coast of Venezuela and coming up to Barbados. Coming up that far into the Caribbean is about the full range that one of these vessels could do.
How many of you were waiting for them? What was the operation from your point of view?
Prior to going out to Barbados, I'd actually been the SIO in charge of the desk back in the UK, so I was very familiar with the region, with Barbados, with the Eastern Caribbean and with the US. And I was also very fortunate that when I went out there, the number 2 guy there, Phil Marshall, had been there for a year. We had the intelligence. We went down to see the drug squad. Phil had already established a very good relationship with them. And the sergeant there, Ricardo Fields, I had met because he'd come over as part of the training unit. We would then also have maritime support. We would use the maritime unit of the police force to come in to help the interdiction, and we also had the support of the C-26 aircraft, and it was a tremendous asset.
So it was following the boat, or it had the boat under surveillance?
It would be able to follow the boat because it had what's called FLIR, which is a system whereby you can see the boat. It's like an infrared image, so that once they lock onto the boat, they can then follow it in. I would hasten to add that any proper operation, when you're doing something from sea like we were doing, you need an asset above you because it can look down and it can cover a large range. And once it locks onto your target, it can then take it in and guide the support of the land forces. So everything was planned, everything looked really good, and as they always say, everything goes smoothly until you actually engage with the enemy.
So what happened next?
The vessel had been spotted, and we were getting the intelligence through that the shore party, that's the people who are going to be there to meet the consignment, were moving into place. There must have been about a dozen of them, and they were well-known traffickers on the island. The main guy behind it was well-known, and therefore it gave all the credibility to the intelligence we were getting. We were in the right place, looking at the right thing. I'm sat there, and then all of a sudden, I hear a shot fire out, and I said, Phil, somebody's shot a gun. There's definitely gunfire. And Phil said, well, I didn't hear anything. I said, trust me, there is. And then all hell let loose. The intelligence started to come in that bad guys who were in the shore party were starting to run away. And then the next thing I hear is the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire. And it was the Marine unit had then returned fire on the bad guys who'd opened fire on them. when we carried out the debriefing, they must have fired over 600 shots.
600 shots?
Yeah, that was what hit the vessel. There was more than that fire. But
Did they arrest those on board?
What then happened was that vessel was stopped, but there was no drugs found. So we immediately thought, they've ditched it, they've put it overboard. The crew are arrested, several members of the shore party are taken in, and then we're doing the quick debrief as to what had happened. One of the policemen had gone into a point where he could see the parole coming in, but it just so happened the place he was going to go in, there was already one of the shore party, one of the bad guys there. And as he went in to go in there, the guy pulled a gun to shoot the policeman, and therefore in self-defence, the policeman pulled his gun out and shot him. And he was killed. He was dead.
Graham, if a police officer shoots somebody in this country on an operation, there's going to be a long inquiry, they'll be suspended. What happened to the police officer in Barbados who'd shot the bad guy?
That was exactly my thoughts that night running through my head is I'm going to have to report back to London. The first operation I've been on, we've got no drugs and one dead body. So that next morning, I go and speak to Ricardo Fields, the sergeant, and I said to Ricardo, I said, this doesn't look good, Ricardo. I said, we've got one dead man and your officer is obviously shot. What's going to happen? And he says, what do you mean what's going to happen? He said, the bad guy had a gun, he pulled it out, we've recovered the gun, he shot him, it was in self-defence. And I said, so how long's he off work? He said, what do you mean off work? He's back now. He's helping us out do the searches.
Clearly less bureaucracy in Barbados than there is in the UK.
I'm not saying that if an incident like this happens in the UK, you don't take action against them, a person, or at least carry out an investigation. But certainly from what I've seen, even more and more now with the investigations carried out by the IPCO, they go on forever. We've just had one recently where the guy was under investigation for 10 years. That can't be right. Look at the facts, quickly make the decision, and was it justified and was it proportionate? And in this case, it was.
Let's go to your main posting before Barbados, which was Miami. How important was Miami to the international drugs trade when you arrived there?
It's difficult to describe. You just had the cocaine wars there where there'd been the shootings in Deadland Mall, and everything happened in Miami. It was the crossroads to everything, and it's the busiest city for the drugs trade. If we were to do a comparison that people here in the UK would understand, I likened it to Clapham Junction, that everything went through there. It was busy. You had the organisers coming up from South America. You had the bad guys from the UK who were going to be bringing the drugs in. You had money laundering. You had everything.
Why was it so important to the drugs trade? Was it because its geographic proximity to South America?
Yeah, as the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration said to me, the special agent in charge in Miami, he said, Graham, welcome to Miami. The good thing about Miami is it's near to the United States of America. And you're wondering, what's he on about? And then you realise it is. It's not America. It's not the US. Miami and southern Florida, that part of it, is the world encompassed. It is Spanish is the first language, not English. Nobody spoke English, they spoke Spanish. So it was a real juxtamix of cultures and everything. So that it was a couple of hours on a plane from Venezuela, same from Colombia, and then you're only 5, 6 hour, 7 hour flight from the UK. So it's a meeting point.
Graham, can we talk about some of the memorable operations you were involved in Miami? One I know, Operation Klondike, involved a Scot as one of the main suspects.
Yes, you're right. And even not only a Scot, he was a Scot from a small town called Blairgowrie, which is on the east coast of Scotland, just up from Dundee. And lo and behold, it was about 10 miles from the small village I come from. So I knew the region, I knew the guy. And I think what the operation demonstrates, that not only as a DLO are you there to gather intelligence, you also broker intelligence, and you also, as the liaison between the UK operational teams and the host agencies. The man behind the importation was a guy called Julian Chisholm, and in the Glasgow office had been for about a year maintaining covert surveillance on him and gathering intelligence about his activity and what he was. Chisholm was known, he'd been previously involved but never convicted or caught for doing other drug importations. So they were looking, and the intelligence was that he was going to be behind a significant cannabis importation by vessel from Venezuela. The captain had been recruited by Chisholm, and he'd had the connections down into South America to get the drugs. It was an airdrop. Basically what that is the aircraft will fly over the vessel and drop into the sea the drugs, which are inflated. They'll then be picked up and put on the vessel. The vessel that was involved in this was called the DIM-RB, and the main guy who was sailing it was a guy called Torres. The vessel comes into Scottish waters, and the operational team were aware that the case was about to unfold, but they didn't actually then see the landing of the drugs. The two Scottish guys that were involved and on board the vessel actually got in a dinghy with the drugs. Torres told them, get off the ship, we're putting the drugs in the dinghy, and the dinghy then started to make its way into the coast. And at that point, it subsequently found out that some of the drugs had fallen overboard. They then managed to land the drugs in Scotland. The other guys came up in the van, and the drugs were eventually put into that van, which was then going to make its way back down the coast. There's only basically one way in and one way out of the north of Scotland, and that's down the A9. So they knew the drugs had been landed, but didn't know what was going to happen. And as fortune would have it, an off-duty policeman actually saw the van, got the registration, and then checks conducted showed that it had been rented in Dundee. Therefore, they knew the drugs potentially were going to be on there. So the van was eventually stopped and searched, and to much of the amazement, it wasn't cannabis, it was coke. It was the largest seizure of cocaine in Scotland at that time. In fact, I believe it was potentially the largest cocaine seizure that had been made in the UK. And as Phil says, I just wonder sometimes these days how many people who are out there abroad have got that operational experience that would know what to do.
I think that's a key point, Graham, because, doing maritime jobs is very, very difficult, as we know. But we had a depth and breadth of experience in doing them before we were sent overseas. We were doing jobs in Scotland, we were doing jobs in Norfolk, we were doing jobs in Devon, Cornwall, Anglesey, Wales, where we learnt a lot. And it wasn't just the planning lens, it was the execution of it. And one of the reasons we became very good at boat jobs is that Customs had its own fleet of cutters in the UK, which supported our operations. And we went to the cutter commanders very early to say, what's your thoughts on this? This is the scenario. Where are you best positioned to do the intervention afterwards, etc.? But what it also told us, you need to control the mothership. You need to try and control the daughtership and the go fast. That's why we increasingly developed our technical capability to put beacons and eavesdropping devices on suspect vessels so that we could track them effectively, because you're halfway there if you can track the mothership. With the locals, they also knew we weren't trying to steal the job, claim credit for it. We were trying to support and assist them. And people always used to say, but, your chief constables used to say, why are you putting all this resource into helping people in Barbados, Antigua, St. Lucia, Grenadines, St. Vincent, Trinidad, Jamaica, let alone South America? And it's like, we're stifling it at source here, guys. We're getting to the heart and soul of the drug trafficking operation. This is why we do it, but we're not looking to claim any credit for it. We're helping the locals.
Graham, when you first got out there, what was the working day like?
To give you a sort of feeling for it, technically you are 24/7. You're never really off duty as an LO, especially where I was, and Phil would be the same. You've got the time difference, so, when it's 5 hours behind, so when your working day's sort of starting, the working day in England or the UK's starting to draw a close. So, you'd be lying in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the UK, and the phone would go, and somebody would be giving you some information about something that was about to happen, and they'd go, "You sound a bit groggy, Graham." "Yeah, I'm a bit groggy. It's 3 o'clock in the morning." And they go, "Oh yeah, I forgot about the time difference." So you were never off duty, and you sort of were 24/7.
Graham, could we go back to another operation down in Miami, which was Operation Emerge, which again, this also involved the Special Boat Service, I believe, in the River Thames?
It was a joint British and US operation and was involved in the importation of cocaine from Venezuela. The original information was being handled by, back in the 90s, what was the Regional Crime Squad, which became the National Crime Squad eventually. The intelligence was that the vessel was going to sail right up the River Thames with the drugs on board where it would be offloaded. So they would need maritime support to do that. And the people that had that capability were customs.
But you needed some military help as well, didn't you, on that particular one?
Yeah. They knew there was a potential that the smugglers were going to have guns. Therefore, there would need to be police support. And that's where the Special Boat Service came in. They had been asked to assist in this operation. We'd started to use them on international operations. And that relationship was built up by a guy who became a legend in his own lunchtime, was John Hector, a bigger-than-life character. He was a spitting image, Robbie Coltrane, a big, bluff Scotsman, who unfortunately he's no longer with us, John. But John was a legend. And he became very impressed with the professional of the Special Boat Service. Their dictum were the 7 Ps. Proper preparation and planning prevents piss-poor performance. And I think that's something we in customs could always relate to. If you haven't planned it right, then it's going to end up wrong.
Otherwise, fail to plan and plan to fail.
Yeah.
So what happened on the day?
This was the only second time they'd ever been deployed in UK territorial, because the other being the siege, the Iranian embassy siege when SAS were deployed. So ministerial approval would have been given to deploy the Special Boat Service, and in fact their role would have been kept fairly secret. Unfortunately, somebody in one of the apartments on the River Thames actually videoed it, so it became news, so it got out there.
What actually happened? I mean, did they parachute onto it?
No, they came up
rappel onto it?
No, they came up on go fast and ribs beside it, stopped the vessel, boarded it, and made the arrest.
Do you know how the bad boys on the boat responded to armed soldiers coming up onto the deck?
They weren't happy. I think that's the best way to put it. So they were done, and as I say, the vessel was stopped, the drugs were taken down, and then you've got where the hard work then starts. Yes, that's hard work getting it to that point, but the hard work is always getting it to trial and get it to court.
So another very successful operation.
Yeah, the drugs that were seized were just under 800 kilos, which at the time was one of the biggest seizures ever.
So, Phileas, using the special boat service, there must be a huge advantage to have their expertise. But what were the issues and the problems of working with special forces?
You have to remember that these are military guys, highly trained, the best of breed military guys, and they come to the table with a military perspective, not a law enforcement perspective. They had their own rules of engagement. So we had to very, very carefully utilise them. We had to train with them. We had to work alongside their protocol so they knew what the rules of engagement were when they were working alongside us. Because they may well be subject further down the road if something goes wrong and there is a shooting to judicial review, and it's not something they're used to. So we would use different parts of UK Special Forces depending on the requirement. The Special Reconnaissance Regiment for surveillance and technical operations, the Special Boat Service for military operations, and the Special Air Service were generally used in very hostile situations where there is a real threat to our officers or to locals or to members of the public. We had a protocol for engaging with the Special Forces through the MOD, which worked really well, which developed over the years. We had a lawyer in our solicitor's office, Annabel Bolt, who was also an expert in maritime law, and she did so much in the early days to make sure that we had the right legal platforms to be deploying these guys and girls. And we did deploy them not only in boat operations, but in undercover operations and in sensitive surveillance operations, in technical operations from South America to Southeast Asia. Absolutely fantastic. You had to be careful what you asked them, because if you said to them, can we do this job? They would always reply, of course we can, boss. But then you had to ask them to talk you through how you manage to mitigate risk on the operations, which for us was absolutely vital. It was important for them, but they would often see our jobs as a training exercise, not a real job. In managing the operations, we had to remember these were military guys, highly trained military guys, who would often be in very serious situations where they would use maximum force to extricate themselves from a situation. What our understanding of reasonable and necessary is not necessarily theirs. And I understand that because they're operating in war zones all the time. So we had to carefully talk through that to make sure we all understood the rules of engagement so that things wouldn't go wrong. And it was phenomenal. They trained and trained and trained until it became instinctive, so that when something happened, they pressed the button and it kicked in.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Narco Warriors.